She sheltered a homeless man, unaware he was a billionaire searching for true love. The rain-soaked stranger slumped against her building's brick wall looked like every broken promise the city had ever made, until she saw his eyes, and something in her world that had been carefully locked away began to tremble at its hinges. The November rain fell like cold judgment on the streets of Chicago, turning the sidewalks into rivers of grime and regret. Amara Washington clutched her grocery bag tighter, mentally calculating whether the dented can of beans she'd scored from the discount bin would stretch to 3 meals or just 2. Her sneakers, held together by prayer and duct tape, squelched against the pavement as she turned the corner onto Millbrook Street, where her studio apartment waited like a reluctant sanctuary. That's when she saw him. He was huddled beneath the awning of her building, a cardboard sign propped against his knees, his clothes hanging off his frame like forgotten questions. Most people would have crossed the street. Most people did cross the street. Amara had watched them all week, their eyes sliding away with practiced indifference, as if poverty were contagious. But Amara wasn't most people. She'd been taught to see the invisible, trained by a childhood where she'd been the invisible one. Her mother had worked 3 jobs just to keep them in a roach-infested apartment, and every morning before school, they'd shared a single piece of toast split down the middle. "We're rich in different ways, baby," her mother would say, though her hands trembled from exhaustion. The man's sign read, "Hungry. Anything helps. God bless." The handwriting was surprisingly neat, each letter carefully formed despite the cardboard's warped surface. Amara slowed her steps, studying him. Most of the homeless men in the neighborhood had that vacant, 1,000-yard stare, the look of people who'd stopped expecting anything from anyone. But this man was different. Even hunched and shivering, there was something about the way he held himself, something that didn't quite fit the narrative his appearance told. "Rough night?" she asked, stopping a few feet away. He looked up, and Amara felt her breath catch. His eyes were startling, intelligent, clear, and somehow sad in a way that had nothing to do with being cold or hungry. They were the eyes of someone who'd lost something precious, not something material. "Every night's rough when you're sleeping on cardboard," he said, his voice surprisingly warm, tinged with something that might have been humor under different circumstances. "I'm Jim," he added after a pause, extending a hand that trembled slightly from the cold. Amara hesitated only a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused but not in the way she'd expected. These weren't the hands of someone who'd been homeless for years, there was something fresh about his desperation, like a wound that hadn't quite scarred over yet. "Amara. I live right here." She gestured to the building behind them, immediately regretting how that might sound, like she was rubbing her relative privilege in his face, even though her privilege was a 400-square-foot box with heating that only worked when it felt like it. "Lucky you," Jim said, but there was no bitterness in his tone, just a statement of fact. The rain picked up, shifting from a drizzle to a proper downpour, and Amara made a decision that would change both their lives forever, though she had no way of knowing it then. "Come on," she said, already moving toward the door. "You can't stay out here. You'll catch pneumonia." Jim's eyes widened. What? My place. Just for tonight." Amara was already punching in the door code, not looking back because if she looked back, she might chicken out, might listen to the voices in her head that sounded suspiciously like her Aunt Cheryl warning her about strange men and poor judgment. "I've got a couch. It's lumpy, but it's dry. You don't even know me." Jim stood frozen on the sidewalk, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "I know you're cold. I know you're wet. And I know what it feels like when people look through you like you're made of glass." Amara held the door open, rain soaking her own shoulders now. "So are you coming, or are you planning to debate the philosophy of stranger danger in a thunderstorm?" For a long moment, Jim just stared at her, and Amara could see something working behind his eyes, surprise, suspicion, maybe even shame. Then, slowly, he gathered his cardboard sign and a small backpack she hadn't noticed before, and followed her inside. What would you do if you encountered someone desperate in the rain, walk past, or risk your safety to help? Drop your answer in the comments below. The elevator was broken, of course it was, so they climbed the 4 flights to Amara's apartment in silence, their wet shoes leaving dark prints on the stained carpet. Jim followed a respectful 3 steps behind, and Amara found herself acutely aware of every sound, his breathing, steady but labored, the drip of water from their clothes, the distant thump of bass from Mr. Henderson's apartment on the 2nd floor. What am I doing? The question screamed in her head as she fumbled with her keys. I just invited a complete stranger into my home. A man. A homeless man I know absolutely nothing about. But then she remembered his eyes, those impossibly sad eyes that held stories she couldn't quite read, and pushed the door open anyway. It's not much, she said, flipping on the light switch. The single bulb flickered twice before holding steady, casting a warm yellow glow over her tiny kingdom. But it's home. Jim stepped inside, and Amara saw her apartment through his eyes, the futon that doubled as her bed and couch, the kitchenette that was really just a hot plate and a mini-fridge shoved into a corner, the second-hand bookshelf crammed with library sale finds and teaching manuals. Her one extravagance, a small African violet on the windowsill, sat in a chipped coffee mug, its purple blooms the only splash of real color in the beige monotony. It's perfect, Jim said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made Amara's throat tighten. Bathroom's there. She pointed to a door barely wider than her shoulders. There's a towel on the rack, it's clean. You should get out of those wet clothes before you freeze to death in my living room. That would be terrible for my security deposit. Jim's lips twitched, almost a smile. Can't have that. While he disappeared into the bathroom, Amara changed quickly in the corner, angling herself away from the door and throwing on her warmest sweats, the ones with the hole in the knee and the bleach stain on the thigh. She heard the water running, then silence. When Jim emerged 15 minutes later, his hair was damp but clean, his face scrubbed of street grime, and Amara felt her breath catch again. Without the dirt and the desperate slump of his shoulders, he was striking. Not conventionally handsome in the way of billboard models, but there was something about the planes of his face, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to take in everything with an intensity that felt almost invasive. He looked younger than she'd initially thought, maybe early 40s, with silver threading through dark hair that suggested premature graying rather than age. Your clothes are in the dryer, he said, gesturing back toward the bathroom. Hope that's okay. They were dripping everywhere. Amara blinked. Her building didn't have a dryer. Then she saw he'd hung them over the shower rod, water pooling in the tub below. Of course. She felt foolish for assuming. Thank you, she managed. I made tea. It's not fancy, just supermarket brand, but it's hot. They sat on opposite ends of her futon, the silence stretching between them like an uninvited guest. Amara cradled her chipped mug, studying Jim over the rim. He held his tea like it was precious, both hands wrapped around the cup as if absorbing every bit of warmth it offered. So, she said finally, how long have you been on the streets? Jim's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Does it matter? I'm just making conversation. Are you? His eyes met hers, sharp and assessing. Or are you trying to figure out if I'm going to rob you in your sleep? The bluntness should have offended her, but instead, Amara found herself laughing, a short, surprised bark of sound. Okay, fair. Maybe a little of both. 3 weeks, Jim said after a pause, his voice softening. I've been out there 3 weeks. That's not very long. Amara frowned. What happened? Life happened. Bad decisions. Worse luck. He took a sip of tea, his expression closing off. The usual story everyone tells themselves when they end up with cardboard for a mattress. But it wasn't the usual story, Amara could tell. There was too much education in his vocabulary, too much careful control in the way he spoke. This was a man who'd known comfort once, who'd fallen from somewhere high rather than never climbing at all. You don't have to talk about it, she said gently. I guess I'm curious. You don't seem like the typical, she caught herself. Sorry. That sounded terrible. Homeless person. Jim's smile was bitter. It's okay. I don't fit the stereotype. I still have most of my teeth, I can form complete sentences, and I haven't started yelling at pigeons yet. Give me another month, though. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? He set his mug down on the floor, leaning back against the futon cushion. Everyone has an image in their head of what poverty looks like. Usually, it doesn't look like someone who remembers how to use semicolons. Amara felt heat crawl up her neck. He was right, and she hated that he was right. She'd made assumptions, judgments, even as she tried to help him. The realization sat heavy in her chest. I'm sorry, she said quietly. You're right. That was ignorant of me. Jim's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. You're actually apologizing. Why wouldn't I? Because most people don't. They just get defensive or change the subject. He studied her with those unsettling eyes. Why did you invite me up here, Amara? Really? She considered lying, offering some platitude about Christian charity or basic human decency. But something about the way he asked, the genuine curiosity in his voice, made her want to tell the truth. Because I know what it's like to be invisible, she said finally. Growing up, my mom and I, we were poor. Not homeless, but close. And I watched people look through us like we were ghosts. Like our poverty made us somehow less real, less worthy of acknowledgement. She wrapped her arms around herself. I swore I'd never do that to someone else. I swore I'd never become one of those people who just steps over bodies on the sidewalk. Jim was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Thank you." For what? For seeing me. For not stepping over me. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he cleared his throat, looking away. You have no idea what that means. The vulnerability in his admission made Amara's chest ache. She wanted to ask more, to understand the story behind those sad eyes, but she sensed that pushing would only make him retreat further. So instead, she stood and retrieved the dented can of beans from her grocery bag. I hope you like beans, she said, moving toward the hot plate. Because that's basically all I've got. Beans and some slightly stale bread. Sounds like a feast, Jim said, and this time, his smile reached his eyes. As Amara heated their meager dinner, she felt Jim's gaze on her back, not predatory or uncomfortable, but contemplative, as if he were trying to solve an equation that didn't quite add up. She understood the feeling. Nothing about this night made sense, not by any reasonable standard. She'd broken every rule she'd ever learned about stranger danger, inviting potential chaos into her carefully controlled life. And yet, as they ate their beans in companionable silence, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, less alone. She had no way of knowing that the man sitting on her lumpy futon, savoring beans like they were caviar, could have bought her entire building with pocket change. That 3 weeks ago, he'd stood in a penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline and made a decision that would lead him here, to this moment, to her. Jim Jethro watched Amara wash their dishes in a tiny sink, and felt something crack open in his chest, something that 3 failed marriages and billions of dollars had never managed to touch. She hummed while she worked, a tuneless melody that spoke of contentment in the smallest things. For the first time in 3 weeks, Jim wondered if his experiment had been worth it after all. Amara woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, suspended in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, she thought she'd dreamed the entire previous evening. But then she opened her eyes and saw Jim sitting cross-legged on the floor by her window, the African violet repositioned to catch the morning light, a steaming mug balanced on his knee. You're still here, she said, her voice rough with sleep. Jim turned, and the early sunlight caught his profile, softening the hard edges that poverty had carved into his face. You thought I'd rob you and run? The thought crossed my mind around 3 a.m. Amara sat up, pushing tangled hair from her face. She'd given Jim the futon and taken the floor herself, insisting despite his protests. Now her back screamed in complaint, reminding her that 28 was too old for sleeping on hardwood. "Where did you get coffee?" "I didn't. It's tea again, but I made it strong." He gestured to a second mug on the counter. "Hope that's okay. I figured after giving a stranger your bed, you deserved something hot to wake up to." "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." Jim's expression grew serious. "Amara, about last night." "Don't." She held up a hand, suddenly afraid of where this was going. Gratitude she could handle, but if he was about to offer some kind of payment, some transaction that would reduce her kindness to a business exchange, she didn't want to hear it. "You don't owe me anything." "Not thanks, not explanations, nothing." "That's not what I was going to say." Jim stood, unfolding himself with a grace that seemed at odds with his circumstances. "I was going to say that what you did, bringing me up here, feeding me, trusting me, it's the first genuinely kind thing anyone's done for me in longer than I can remember. And I want you to know that I see that. I see you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with something Amara couldn't quite name. She felt exposed suddenly, as if Jim seeing her was somehow more intimate than if he'd actually seen her undressed. "Well," she said, aiming for lightness and missing by a mile, "don't go spreading it around. I have a reputation as a heartless witch to maintain." Jim's laugh was unexpected, deep and genuine, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere real. "Your secret's safe with me." Amara retrieved her tea, wrapping both hands around the warmth. Outside, Chicago was waking up, car horns blaring, the rumble of the L train in the distance, someone's alarm clock bleeding through the thin walls. Monday morning, which meant she had exactly 45 minutes to get ready for work. "I have to leave for work soon," she said, hating how the word sounded like an eviction notice. "You can stay until I go, if you want. Finish your tea." "Where do you work?" "Lincoln Elementary. I'm a teacher's assistant." She moved toward her closet, really just a tension rod with a curtain, and pulled out her work clothes, black slacks that were getting shiny at the knees, a blue blouse that had been gently used when she'd bought it at Goodwill 3 years ago. "It doesn't pay much, but I love it. Kids are honest in a way adults forget how to be." "That sounds nice." Jim's voice held something wistful. "Being around people who haven't learned to lie yet." Amara paused, her hand on the curtain. "Everyone lies, Jim. Even kids. They just haven't figured out how to lie to themselves yet. That's the real difference." She changed quickly behind the curtain, hyper-aware of Jim's presence just feet away, the rustle of fabric seeming obscenely loud. When she emerged, he was standing by the door, his dried clothes from yesterday back on, his backpack over one shoulder. "I should go," he said. "You don't have to rush." "Yes, I do." His smile was sad. "You've already done more than enough. More than anyone should for a stranger." Amara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he could stay longer, maybe even leave him a key so he'd have somewhere warm to return to. But the practical part of her brain, the part that sounded like Aunt Cheryl, screamed warnings about boundaries and safety and all the very real reasons why last night had been reckless. "Will you be okay?" she asked instead. "I've survived 3 weeks. I'll survive another day." Jim opened the door, then hesitated. "Amara, if you ever need anything. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous coming from someone with nothing, but if there's ever anything I can do." "Just stay safe," she interrupted, unable to bear the earnestness in his voice. "That's all I need." He nodded, lingering for one more moment as if memorizing her face, then disappeared into the hallway. Amara listened to his footsteps descend the stairs, each thud like a closing chapter, and told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was just hunger. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Amara helped Mrs. Peterson wrangle 23 first graders through reading lessons and basic addition, wiped tears and noses, refereed arguments over who got to feed the class hamster. Normally she found comfort in the routine, the simple needs and joys of 6-year-olds. But today her mind kept drifting back to her apartment, to a man with sad eyes drinking tea in the morning light. "Earth to Amara," Mrs. Peterson said during lunch, waving a hand in front of her face. "You've been stirring that yogurt for 5 minutes. Either eat it or marry it, but make a decision." "Sorry." Amara set down her spoon. "Rough night? Man trouble?" Mrs. Peterson waggled her eyebrows. She was 56, had been teaching for 30 years, and had appointed herself Amara's unofficial life coach despite Amara's protests that her life didn't need coaching, just better funding. "Not the kind you're thinking. Honey, at our age, man trouble only comes in 2 flavors, the kind that breaks your heart and the kind that breaks your bank account. Sometimes both." Mrs. Peterson bit into her sandwich. "Which one is he?" Amara thought about Jim's careful way of speaking, the contradictions written into every gesture. "Neither. Both. I don't know." "Well, that's clear as mud." Mrs. Peterson studied her with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You want my advice? Do I have a choice?" "Never." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Whatever you're doing, if it makes you look this distracted, it's either really stupid or really important. The trick is figuring out which before it's too late. What if it's both? Then buckle up, Buttercup. You're in for a hell of a ride." The conversation stayed with Amara through the afternoon, through the chaos of dismissal and the long bus ride home. The sky was already darkening when she turned onto Millbrook Street, the November cold biting through her thin coat. She half expected to see Jim back in his spot under the awning, but the space was empty save for a piece of cardboard folded neatly against the wall. Disappointment and relief warred in her chest. She told herself it was better this way, cleaner, simpler. Last night had been an aberration, a moment of compassion that had run its natural course. Jim had moved on to find his own way, and she could return to her regularly scheduled life of predictable poverty and manageable loneliness. But when she climbed the stairs and unlocked her door, she found something that made her breath catch. On her tiny kitchen counter sat a brown paper bag. Inside were groceries, real groceries, not the dented cans and day-old bread she usually bought. Fresh vegetables, actual coffee, a loaf of bread so soft it must have come from a real bakery. And tucked among the items, a note written on the back of a receipt in that same careful handwriting from his cardboard sign. "Thank you for seeing me. For one night, I remembered what it felt like to be human. J." Amara sank onto her futon, the note trembling in her hands. The groceries must have cost at least $30, money Jim clearly couldn't spare, money he should have used for himself. The waste of it, the beautiful, foolish waste of it, made her want to cry and laugh in equal measure. She had no way of knowing that the groceries had been purchased with a black American Express card, discreetly retrieved from a safety deposit box Jim had set up before his experiment began. That the man who'd slept on her futon could have filled her apartment with groceries floor to ceiling without noticing the expense. All Amara knew was that a homeless stranger had spent money he didn't have to thank her for basic human kindness, and somewhere in the labyrinth of Chicago's streets, Jim was probably sleeping hungry because of it. She set the note carefully on her bookshelf, between a worn copy of Maya Angelou's poems and a teaching manual on childhood literacy. Then she made herself a real cup of coffee, not the tea she'd been forcing herself to call coffee for months, and tried to convince herself that she'd never see Jim again. The coffee was delicious. The lie tasted bitter. 3 days passed before Amara saw Jim again. She'd started looking for him, not consciously at first, just letting her eyes drift to that spot under the awning whenever she came home from work. Each time the space was empty, she told herself the tightness in her chest was relief, not disappointment. On Thursday evening, as she struggled up the stairs with a bag of used books from the library sale, she heard a familiar voice from the second-floor landing. "Need help with those?" Jim sat on the steps, looking cleaner than he had that first night but more tired, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. He wore the same clothes, she recognized the brown jacket, the worn jeans, but his hair was freshly washed, his face shaved. Jim. His name came out more breathless than she'd intended. What are you doing here? Honestly? I'm not entirely sure. He stood, taking the bag from her arms before she could protest. I've been walking past this building for 3 days, trying to convince myself it was pathetic to come back. That you'd think I was stalking you or trying to take advantage. Are you? Stalking you? No. Trying to take advantage. He considered this as they climbed to her floor. Maybe. But not in the way you're thinking. Amara unlocked her door, hyper-aware of the intimacy of letting him back into her space. So what way, then? Jim set the books on her counter, his movements careful, deliberate. I keep thinking about what you said, about being invisible. About people looking through you. He turned to face her. For the past 3 weeks, I've been a ghost. People cross the street to avoid me. Security guards follow me in stores. Mothers pull their children closer when I pass. And I deserve it, I chose this. But Amara, you saw me. You looked at me like I was still a person worth seeing. You are a person worth seeing. Am I? The question hung heavy with self-doubt. How do you know? You don't know anything about me. I could be anyone. A con artist. A criminal. Someone dangerous. Are you? No. But that's not the point. That's exactly the point. Amara dropped her bag, meeting his gaze head-on. I looked at you and I saw someone cold and hungry and human. That's all I needed to know. The rest? The story of how you got there. That's yours to tell or keep. Jim's expression cracked, something raw and vulnerable breaking through. I'm scared I'm going to disappoint you. Then don't put me on that kind of pedestal. I'm not some saint who rescued you out of pure goodness. I was lonely, Jim. I've been lonely for so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone, even if that someone was a stranger who needed my couch for a night. She laughed bitterly. So maybe we're both taking advantage. Maybe we both saw something in each other we desperately needed. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. I brought dinner, Jim said finally, pulling 2 wrapped sandwiches from his backpack. Turkey and Switzerland. From that deli on Clark Street. I remembered you said you liked Swiss. Amara stared at the sandwiches, easily $15 worth. Jim, you can't keep spending money on me. You need. I know what I need. His voice was firm. And right now, what I need is to eat dinner with someone who sees me. Is that okay? She should have said no. Should have asked where a homeless man got money for deli sandwiches. Should have recognized that none of this added up, that Jim's contradictions were piling too high to ignore. Instead, she said, it's more than okay. They ate while sitting on her futon, Jim telling stories about the downtown library where he spent his days, the regulars he'd met, the security guard who looked the other way when Jim nodded off in the warm corner by the radiator. Amara told him about her students, about little Marcus who'd finally learned to read his own name, about the broken heating system at school that left the kids shivering through morning lessons. You really love them, Jim observed. The kids. They're the only honest thing in my life. Amara wiped crumbs from her lap. Adults are exhausting. We're all just wearing masks, pretending to be more together than we are. But kids? They tell you exactly what they think. Miss Amara, your breath smells funny. Miss Amara, why are you always sad? They see right through the performance. Like you saw through mine. Amara met his eyes. I don't know what I saw, Jim. I still don't. But I know I want to keep seeing it. Jim reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm, his grip gentle but sure. Then let's make a deal. I'll keep coming back, and you keep being honest with me. No masks. No performance. Just two people who are tired of being invisible. Deal, Amara whispered. Neither of them knew that the first crack in Jim's carefully constructed experiment had just appeared, a fissure that would soon split his two worlds irreparably apart. 2 weeks dissolved into a routine that felt both natural and impossible. Jim appeared at Amara's door every few evenings, always with food he claimed to have gotten from shelters or church kitchens, explanations that grew increasingly thin as the quality improved. Amara pretended to believe him, and Jim pretended he didn't notice her skepticism. They talked about everything except the truth. "Tell me about your family," Jim asked one evening as they shared Thai takeout that had definitely not come from any shelter. Rain drummed against the window, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy in her small apartment. Amara stabbed at her pad Thai, memories rising unbidden. "My mom died when I was 19. Cancer. She worked herself to the bone for us, and in the end, her bones just gave up." She set down her fork. "My dad left when I was 3. Apparently, poverty wasn't the adventure he'd signed up for." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." "She taught me everything that matters, how to be kind, how to be strong, how to survive on nothing and still find joy." Amara smiled through the ache. She used to say that rich people collect things, but poor people collect moments. She was right about that. Jim's expression darkened with something Amara couldn't quite read, guilt, maybe, or recognition. "What about other families?" "Aunt Cheryl, but we don't talk much. She thinks I'm wasting my life being picky about men and working for peanuts." Amara laughed without humor. "She introduced me to her friend's son last year, a lawyer who spent the entire dinner talking about his car and checking his reflection in his spoon. When I said I wasn't interested, she called me too proud for my own good." "Maybe you're exactly proud enough for your own good," Jim said quietly. "What about you? Any family?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Jim's jaw tightened, and for a moment Amara thought he wouldn't answer. "I had a daughter once," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma. She'd be 15 now." "Had?" The past tense hit Amara like a fist. "She's not dead, at least, I don't think she is. Her mother took her when she was 5. Moved across the country, changed their names, disappeared into the kind of life that money can buy." The bitterness in his voice was corrosive. "I tried to find them, spent years trying. But some people don't want to be found." Amara's heart cracked open. "Jim, I'm so sorry. That's, God, I can't even imagine. The worst part." Jim stared at his hands as if they held answers. "I don't blame her mother. Not really. I was working all the time, obsessed with building something, proving something. I thought if I could just make enough, be enough, everything else would fall into place. But you can't buy back time. Can't buy back the moments that matter." The vulnerability in his admission felt sacred, dangerous. Amara reached across the space between them and covered his hand with hers. "Is that why you're out here? Why did you end up on the streets?" Jim's laugh was hollow. "It's part of it. I lost sight of what mattered. Lost myself in the process. And by the time I realized what I'd traded away, it was too late to get it back." The explanation felt incomplete, full of holes, but Amara didn't push. She understood the need to keep some pain private, some truths locked away where they couldn't destroy you. "Your daughter, Emma, she's lucky, you know." Jim's head snapped up. "Lucky? Her father's homeless. How lucky is that? Because you're sitting here, broken open over missing her. Because you cared enough to lose yourself when you lost her." Amara squeezed his hand. "My father walked away and never looked back. Didn't lose a night's sleep. Emma has a father who loved her enough to fall apart. That matters." Jim's eyes shimmered, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Find light in the darkest corners. See value in broken things. Maybe because I'm a broken thing too, Amara said softly. And I know how much I'm still worth. Jim pulled her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it stole her breath. You're not broken, Amara. You're the best person I've ever met. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs, her body leaning toward him as if pulled by gravity. Jim's thumb traced circles on her palm, his eyes asking a question his mouth hadn't formed. Then his phone buzzed. Jim froze. The phone, sleek, expensive, utterly wrong, sat on the counter where he'd left it, its screen glowing with an incoming call. The name displayed read, Assistant, Urgent. Amara stared at the device, then at Jim, the pieces finally clicking into a picture she'd been too willfully blind to see. Jim, she said slowly, pulling her hand away. What the hell is going on? Who are you really? Jim's face was drained of color. The phone continued buzzing, each vibration like a hammer blow to the fragile reality they'd constructed. Amara. Answer it. Her voice was nice. Or I will. Jim grabbed the phone, silencing it with trembling fingers. The sudden quiet felt accusatory. It's not what you think. You don't know what I think. Amara stood, putting distance between them, her mind racing through every interaction, every expensive meal, every too clean appearance. Actually, I don't know what I think because I don't know who the hell you are. I'm Jim. Everything I've told you about myself is true. Except the part where you're homeless. She gestured at the phone. Homeless people don't have assistants calling them with urgent business. They don't show up with $50 Thai food and claim it's from a shelter. They don't, her voice cracked. They don't lie to people who open their homes to them. I never lied to you. Omission is still lying, Jim. Or is that even your real name? It is. Jim Jethro. He stood slowly, hands raised as if approaching a wounded animal. And I am homeless, technically. I've been sleeping in shelters, on the street, exactly like I said. Why? The question exploded from her. If you have money, if you have an assistant and a phone that costs more than my rent, why? Jim's shoulders sagged, the weight of his deception finally crushing him. Because I needed to know if anyone could see past what I have to who I am. If anyone could love Jim the person instead of Jim the... He stopped, as if the words were barbed wire on his tongue. Jim what? The billionaire. The admission came out barely above a whisper. I own Jethro Tech. The company's worth about $8 billion. I have 3 ex-wives who married my bank account and a daughter I haven't seen in 10 years because I chose empire building over being a father. His laugh was broken. I spent my whole life accumulating things, and I woke up one day and realized I had everything except anything that mattered. Amara felt the room tilt. You're lying. I wish I was. Jim pulled out his wallet, expensive leather she'd never questioned, and extracted a driver's license. He handed it to her. James Theodore Jethro. That's me. Google it if you don't believe me. She didn't need to. Looking at him now, seeing him properly for the first time without the filter of assumed poverty, she recognized the bone structure, the bearing. He'd been on magazine covers, business sections, probably those stupid billionaire lists that people obsessed over. So this was what? Some kind of experiment? Anger burned through her shock. Were you documenting the poor people who took pity on you? Planning to write a think piece about how good it feels to slum it with the unwashed masses? No, God, no, Amara. Jim stepped toward her and she stepped back, the rejection clear. He stopped. I wanted to know if someone could see me, the real me, without the money distorting everything. Every relationship I've ever had has been about what I could provide, what I could buy. No one's ever just wanted Jim. And you thought pretending to be homeless was the way to find that? Amara's voice shook with fury and hurt. You thought manipulating some poor woman into feeling sorry for you was an authentic connection. I didn't plan for you. The rawness in his voice was undeniable. I didn't plan any of this. I was just going to observe people, see how they treated me when I was nothing. But then you invited me in. You shared your food, your space, your stories. You saw me, Amara, exactly the way I'd hoped someone would, and he ran his hands through his hair. I fell for you. That wasn't part of any plan. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't you dare make this about feelings. You lied to me for weeks. You sat in my apartment, eating food I could barely afford to share, watching me stress about bills and work, and you said nothing. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I know. And I'm sorry. Your sorry means nothing. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You know what the worst part is? I trusted you. I let myself believe that maybe, finally, someone saw me too. But you weren't seeing me, Jim. You were seeing a prop in your little social experiment. The noble poor girl who proved your theory right. That's not true. Get out. Amara, please, just let me explain. Get out. The words tore from her throat. Get out of my home, get out of my life, and take your guilt and your billions and your lies with you. Jim stood frozen, his face a mask of anguish. Then slowly, he gathered his phone, his backpack, the careful pieces of his performance. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, these past 2 weeks have been the most real thing in my life. And I'm sorry I ruined them. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Amara sank to the floor and finally let herself cry. Morning came with cruel indifference. Amara called in sick to work, the first time in 3 years, and spent the day staring at her ceiling, replaying every conversation, every touch, every moment she'd been a fool. The groceries he'd bought still sat in her cabinet. The coffee he'd introduced her to mocked her from the counter. Even her futon held the ghost of him, the indent where he'd sat too many evenings, spinning his web of half-truths. $8 billion. The number was obscene, incomprehensible. She couldn't even imagine what that kind of money looked like, let alone what kind of person hoarded it while people froze on Chicago streets. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I know you don't want to hear from me. But please, let me make this right. J. She deleted it without responding. Then blocked the number. 5 minutes later, another text from a different number. I'm not trying to harass you. I just need you to know that everything I felt was real. The money doesn't change that. J. Delete. Block. By the third number, Amara threw her phone across the room and watched it bounce off the futon. The man had infinite resources and apparently infinite phone numbers. She had nothing, not even the dignity of her anger, because part of her, a treacherous, foolish part, still ached for him. The next morning, Amara dragged herself to work, plastering on a smile that felt like a mask. Mrs. Peterson took one look at her and made a decision. Conference room. Now. And bring that sad face with you. Over burnt coffee and stale donuts, Amara found herself spilling everything, the homeless man, the groceries, the lies, the billions. Mrs. Peterson listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something dangerously close to sympathy. So let me get this straight, she said finally. This billionaire pretended to be homeless to see if someone would love him for himself, found you, caught feelings, and then got caught. That's the summary, yes. And now he's blowing up your phone trying to apologize. Amara nodded miserably. Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee with methodical precision. Honey, I'm going to say something you don't want to hear. Please don't. Too bad. I've earned the right to meddle. She set down her spoon. What he did was manipulative and wrong. The lie was inexcusable. But here's the thing, you're not angry just because he lied. You're angry because the lie made everything you felt seem fake. It was fake. All of it. Was it? Mrs. Peterson's gaze was penetrating. Did his money change how he listened to you? How did he make you laugh? The way he looked at you like you hung the moon. She leaned forward. You fell for who he actually is, Amara. He fell for who you actually are. The circumstances were a lie, but the feelings? Those were real. You're defending him. Hell no. I'm just saying that sometimes the messiest situations are messy because the feelings underneath are real. If this was just some con, you'd be angry but you'd move on. You're devastated because your heart got involved, and hearts don't care about logic. Amara pressed her palms against her eyes. What am I supposed to do? Forgive him? Pretend that what he did doesn't matter because he has nice eyes and made me feel seen for the first time in my life? I don't know, honey. That's between you and whatever God you pray to. Mrs. Peterson stood, squeezing Amara's shoulder. But I do know that punishing yourself by cutting off something real isn't noble, it's just another kind of poverty. That evening, Amara found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Amara. I know money can't fix what I broke. This isn't payment or charity, it's an attempt to balance the scales. You shared your food, your space, your trust with someone you thought had nothing. Let me share what I have with you. Use it for teaching supplies. Student loans. Whatever you need. Or tear it up. The choice is yours, like everything else should have been from the beginning. I won't contact you again. But I need you to know that meeting you didn't just teach me about finding love, it taught me what love actually is. It's not possession or transaction. It's seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway. You saw me completely, even when I was hiding. And you chose me. That gift is worth more than $8 billion. Thank you for letting me remember what it feels like to be human. Yours, if you'll have me, Jim. Amara stared at the check until the numbers blurred. $50,000. She could pay off her student loans. Buy a car. Move to a better apartment. Help her students' families who struggled like she struggled. Or she could tear it up and preserve her pride. What would you do, accept help from someone who hurt you, or hold on to your pride? Comment below. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Miss Washington? An unfamiliar woman's voice. My name is Patricia Hendricks. I'm calling from Child Protective Services. We have a situation with one of your students, little Marcus Thompson. His mother's been hospitalized, no other family, and he's asked for you. Would you be willing to serve as emergency placement until we find a solution? Amara looked at the check in her hand, then at the phone. Sometimes the universe makes decisions for you. Yes, she said. I'll take him. Marcus arrived at her door 2 hours later, clutching a garbage bag containing everything he owned. At 6 years old, he was small for his age, with wide brown eyes that had seen too much and a trembling lower lip he was trying desperately to control. Hey, baby, Amara said softly, crouching to his level. Remember me? Miss Amara from school? My mama's sick, he whispered. The lady said she has to stay in the hospital for a long time. I know, sweetheart. But you're going to stay with me until she's better, okay? You're safe here. Marcus looked around her tiny apartment, the futon, the hot plate, the single window, and his face crumpled. This is smaller than our place. But it's cozy, Amara said, her heart breaking. And I make really good grilled cheese. Are you hungry? He nodded, and she set about making dinner, acutely aware of how little she had to offer. One futon that would now be his. A floor she'd sleep on again. A refrigerator containing eggs, bread, and cheese, barely enough for one person, let alone two. The check sat on her counter, burning a hole in her conscience. After Marcus fell asleep, curled into a ball on her futon clutching a worn stuffed dog, Amara sat on the floor and made a decision that felt like betrayal and salvation in equal measure. She texted Jim's last number, "I need help." The response was immediate, "Anything." "What do you need?" "I have a 6-year-old foster placement. He needs clothes, school supplies, food. I need everything. I hate asking. But he needs more than my pride can afford." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Then, give me 1 hour. Don't hate yourself for this. You're putting him first. That's what love looks like." 63 minutes later, Amara's buzzer rang. She opened the door to find not Jim, but a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and professional efficiency. "Miss Washington. I'm Patricia Chen, Mr. Jethro's personal assistant. May I come in?" "He didn't come himself. He thought you'd prefer that." Patricia entered, taking in the sparse apartment without judgment. "He's outside in the car, actually. Wouldn't leave until he knew you had everything you needed." She handed Amara an envelope. Inside were gift cards to Target, grocery stores, a children's clothing boutique, thousands of dollars worth. And a note in Jim's handwriting. "For Marcus. Every child deserves to feel like they matter. You already know this. Let me help you show him." "There's more," Patricia said gently. "Mr. Jethro has arranged for a child psychologist to meet with Marcus, no charge. And he's setting up a trust for Marcus's mother's medical bills, anonymously, so she won't know where it came from." She paused. "He also wanted you to know that he's donating $2 million to Lincoln Elementary Scholarship Fund and after-school program. In your name." Amara's knees went weak. "What? No, he can't." "He can, and he did. The paperwork's already filed." Patricia's smile was gentle. "Miss Washington, I've worked for Jim Jethro for 12 years. I've seen him donate to countless causes, write checks that could change lives. But I've never seen him care about where the money goes. Not until you." She glanced at the sleeping child on the futon. "He's different now. Whatever you did to him, it woke something up. I didn't do anything. I just treated him like a person." "Exactly." Patricia moved toward the door. "He's waiting downstairs. He doesn't expect you to see him, but I think he's hoping you will. The choice is yours." After she left, Amara stood frozen, Marcus's soft snores the only sound. Every instinct screamed to stay inside, to maintain her anger, to protect the wounds still raw from Jim's betrayal. But Mrs. Peterson's words echoed, "Sometimes the messiest situations are messy because the feelings underneath are real." She grabbed her coat. Jim sat on the hood of a sleek black car, staring at nothing. He looked different, expensive again, wearing clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But his shoulders were slumped, his expression haunted, and when he saw her approach, the hope that flashed across his face was so naked it hurt to witness. "Amara. Don't." She held up a hand, maintaining distance. "I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here because you helped Marcus, and that deserves acknowledgement. I didn't do it for acknowledgement. I know. That's the only reason I'm standing here." She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "You lied to me, Jim. You manipulated me. And I can't just forget that because you write big checks. I know. But..." The word hummed between them. "You also saw something in me that everyone else missed. You made me feel valuable. And maybe you did it under false pretenses, but the way you looked at me," her voice cracked. "That wasn't fake. Was it?" "No." Jim slid off the car, taking one careful step toward her. "Nothing about how I felt, how I feel, was fake. You're brilliant, Amara. You're kind and fierce and you see beauty in broken things. Including me. You're not broken. You're rich. There's a difference. Money doesn't fix loneliness. It just makes it more expensive. His smile was sad. I thought the problem was that people couldn't see past my wealth. But the real problem was that I'd become nothing but my wealth. Until you reminded me I was still human underneath. Amara felt tears threatening. What do you want from me, Jim? A chance. Not to go back to what we had, I know that's gone. But a chance to build something real. Starting from the truth this time. Amara didn't answer immediately. The Chicago wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of impending snow and possibility. Jim waited, his expensive coat flapping, looking more vulnerable than he had in rags. I don't know if I can trust you again, she said finally. Trust isn't something you can buy back, even with $2 million and a guilty conscience. I know. And I'm angry, Jim. I'm so angry that you made me feel small for sharing what little I had when you could have ended my financial stress with pocket change. You let me worry about groceries while sitting on a fortune. She struggled for words. That's cruel, even if you didn't mean it to be. Jim flinched like she'd struck him. You're right. I told myself I was being noble, searching for authentic connection. But really, I was being a coward. Hiding behind an experiment instead of having the guts to be honest. He stepped closer, his eyes intense. But Amara, I need you to understand something. When I was with you, I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was finally being myself. The version of me that existed before the money corrupted everything. That's a nice story, but it doesn't change what you did. No, it doesn't. Jim's voice was steady now, certain. So let me change what I'm doing. Let me prove that I learned something from this disaster. Let me show you who I actually am when I'm not hiding. And who is that? I don't know yet. But I want to find out, with you, if you'll let me. Amara studied his face, the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and loss, the vulnerability that money couldn't mask. She thought about Marcus upstairs, sleeping peacefully because Jim had made sure a child he'd never met would have what he needed. She thought about the scholarship fund that would change lives, the medical bills that wouldn't destroy a single mother's future. She thought about the man who'd sat on her futon, eating beans like they were a feast, and told her she was the most whole person he'd ever met. I'm taking Marcus to the Children's Museum this weekend, she heard herself say. There's a new exhibit on space exploration. He's obsessed with astronauts. Jim's breath caught. Yeah. And apparently, the museum has this fancy donors lounge that we'd never normally have access to. She raised an eyebrow. I'm assuming someone with $8 billion could get us in. The hope that bloomed on his face was almost painful to witness. I could make that happen. Then make it happen. But Jim? She stepped forward until they were close enough to touch, though she didn't. Not yet. You show up as yourself. Real clothes, real life, real James Theodore Jethro. No more disguises. No more experiments. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly, or we're not doing it at all. I can do that. His voice was rough with emotion. I want to do that. And one more thing. Amara's expression hardened. That check you left me. I'm cashing it. But not for me, for a fund I'm setting up for students like Marcus. Kids who need emergency support, whose parents are one crisis away from catastrophe. You want to help? Then help the way you should have been helping all along. Use your obscene wealth to actually change lives. Consider it done. I'll match whatever you raise, dollar for dollar. Of course you will, Amara said, but there was something almost fond in her exasperation. Rich people and their tax-deductible charity. Is it still charity if I'm doing it because the woman I love told me to? The words landed between them like a grenade. Jim looked as surprised as Amara felt that he'd said them. "You don't love me," she said, though her heart was hammering. "You love the idea of me. The noble poor girl who saw past your wealth." "No." Jim closed the distance between them, his hands hovering near her face but not touching, waiting for permission. "I love the woman who called me out on my bullshit. Who looked at my privilege and didn't flinch from naming it cruel. Who's standing here right now, furious and hurt, and still finding a way to demand I be better." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I love your strength, Amara. Your clarity. The way you see the world not as it is but as it should be. That's not an idea. That's you." Amara felt her defenses crumbling, the anger that had sustained her for days dissolving into something more complicated, more terrifying. "I don't know how to do this, Jim. Your world and mine, they don't overlap. They don't even exist in the same universe. Then we build a bridge." He finally touched her, his palm cupping her cheek with devastating gentleness. "You teach me how to be human again. I'll teach you that not all wealth is corruption. We'll meet in the middle. And if we can't, then at least we tried. At least we chose truth over comfort." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I'm tired of living a half-life, Amara. I'm tired of wondering if anyone would choose me if I had nothing. You already answered that question. You chose me when you thought I had nothing. Now I'm choosing you, knowing you'd be fine without anything I could offer." "I wouldn't be fine," Amara admitted, her voice breaking. "I missed you. Even knowing what you'd done, I missed you so much it scared me. Then let me earn my way back. Let me prove that the man you invited into your home is the same man standing here now. Just with better resources to actually help the people you love." Amara looked up at him, at this impossible man who turned her world sideways, and made a choice that felt like jumping off a cliff. "Okay," she whispered. "But Jim, if you ever lie to me again, I won't. I swear to you, Amara. No more masks. No more games. Just me, terrified and hopeful and completely in love with you." He kissed her then, soft and seeking, and Amara kissed him back, tasting redemption and risk in equal measure. Above them, snow began to fall, covering Chicago in white, making everything clean and new. Upstairs, Marcus slept peacefully, dreaming of astronauts and distant stars. In a penthouse across town, Jim's ex-wives would read tomorrow's gossip columns and roll their eyes at his latest publicity stunt. But here, on a quiet street in a forgotten neighborhood, two people who'd learned to be invisible finally saw each other clearly, and chose to be seen. Epilogue, 6 months later. The wedding was small, just Marcus, Mrs. Peterson, Patricia, and a handful of Amara's students in their Sunday best. Jim wore a simple suit, and Amara wore her mother's dress, altered to fit. They didn't register for gifts. Instead, they asked guests to donate to the Marcus Thompson Emergency Fund for At-Risk Youth, which had already helped 47 families stay afloat during crisis. When the judge pronounced them married, Marcus cheered louder than anyone, his new parents laughing through happy tears. And in Amara's pocket, folded carefully, was the original note Jim had left with those first groceries. "Thank you for seeing me." She'd seen him. He'd seen her. And together, they'd learned that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts, and everything to do with being brave enough to be completely, honestly, impossibly known. The end. Would you take a chance on love after betrayal if someone proved they'd changed? Share your thoughts below, we'd love to hear your story.